This is a meeting of the OpenChain Legal Workgroup. We have meetings on an ad hoc basis. We might be setting a more regular schedule in 2024. As with all meetings hosted by the Linux Foundation, this meeting is subject to the Linux Foundation Antitrust Policy Notice. You can find the full antitrust policy on the Linux Foundation website. And if you're from a Linux Foundation member company, you can contact our counsel, Andy Updegrove, with any questions. Now, when it comes to this meeting, we have a relatively simple agenda. We're going to have a meeting overview. Then we're going to have a presentation about maturity models. That's going to be Andrew, and also Stephen is here. So we're going to have their presentation on maturity models. Then we're going to have a space for any other business. So this is where you can raise questions, you can raise new topics, and so on and so forth. And then we'll end the meeting. The expected timeline of this meeting is not so much. We don't expect this to be a long meeting, but we have an hour booked, and our presenters are free to continue as long as they want. And perhaps equally importantly, you're free to raise questions as much as you want to. At the moment, I suggest that you focus on raising questions in the meeting chat. You should have access to that, I believe. If there's any issues with your access to the chat, with things working, just let me know. Okay, so proceeding into the meeting overview. This meeting is about maturity models related to assessing competence around open source management. If you're new to the OpenChain project, we spend our time focused on open source business process management. So this is directly in our remit of the type of activities we like to do and the type of activities that benefit our community. We're going to focus on a maturity model coming to us through our friends at Orcro based on ISO 5230. That's our ISO standard for open source license compliance. And this means the maturity model will be giving a lot of guidance around how, if you're using something like this ISO standard, you can iterate, or as we might refer to it in Japan, where I'm based, Kaizen, continual improvement. And maturity models are a way to benchmark your continual improvement. So pretty useful tools. Now we're going to discuss how OpenChain might make use of maturity models in the future as well. How can we improve our reference material in this area? The presentation we're about to have from Andrew and from Stephen is a clear example of something based around ISO 5230. But it's not the only maturity model being used out there around this ISO standard. So to end the meeting, we'll just take a moment to think how OpenChain can do more reference material in this domain. Okay, we're going to head into the maturity model section of the meeting, and other topics we have, other news, etc. Let's put that into any other business. With the exception of one item, before we get into the maturity models part, I just wanted to do a quick straw poll from people on this call about our next meetings and what you'd like to see in them. So if you have topics you'd like to see in our next meetings, you can just put those topics into the chat. For example, I think it might be rather useful. We're going to have maturity models today. It may be useful to look at the Vizio case in the US. We've seen some posts around that. Luis Villa just did a great post around it, talking about one of the aspects of the case and the impact it has regarding the GPL as a contract. So I think we might take a look at the Vizio story in a future meeting. And if you have any other ideas like that, please put them into the meeting chat, and we can build a potential schedule of legal meetings in the first quarter of this year. Right. Let's dive into the main topic. So, maturity models, we've got Andrew and we've got Stephen on the line. What I'll do is I'll just stop my screen share, hand over to you to begin your sharing and introduce yourselves and whatnot. The introduction I'll do is brief. Andrew and Stephen are both people with experience in areas like law and maturity modeling. They were at the Open Compliance Summit in Tokyo about a month ago, my goodness, and gave an excellent presentation on this maturity model they're about to discuss further today. Andrew has been a very public face of open source for very many years. Stephen is newer into our nest, but brings formidable experience in areas like this maturity modeling. And most importantly, they're very nice people, so you can raise your hand and stop them at any point and ask questions. And don't be shy. This is a work group. We're meant to pause work and dig into things. Right, Andrew, Stephen, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Shane. That's a wonderful introduction. Very much appreciated. And Happy New Year to everyone as well. So let me sort of first of all, can you see the screen okay? My desktop looks like something that's been attacked by a virus from 1993, but hopefully you can see the slide okay.
I think
Yeah, coming through.
Is that okay?
Right. Yep, it's perfect.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, so let me give you a little bit of a history just to explain where we're coming from on this one. And the work that we're doing here is based on client engagement. Client that we've been working with for several years asked us towards the last quarter of last year what mechanisms are available out there in order to help assess the maturity of their open source compliance program. So we've already helped them to establish OpenChain conformance. And the next stage they want to do, they're basically looking at their entire ICT development processes. So to that end, they wanted to align with what they're doing in other areas and coordinate that with applying some form of maturity modeling to the work that they are doing with open source compliance. And we'll be talking a little bit later. Stephen's going to talk sort of briefly about other maturity models that are out there. Shane also touched on that as well. So the first question really is, what is a capability maturity model? And it's a framework for determining the degree of capability, adaptability, and resilience of a business function within an organization with the aim of optimizing continuous improvement. And as Shane mentioned, Kaizen, continuous improvement really is the key to this. So it's not a million miles away from what we've already been doing in the context of OpenChain audits, but whereas OpenChain audits will tend to focus on a particular snapshot state in time and say, yes, you are compliant, and there will also normally be a report that comes with that that says, but there are things that you can do to improve in particular areas, and there's a degree of potentially a sort of roadmap in there as well that says, okay, well, ideally, I'd like to get to point X, and here is how you do that. The way that we've been doing that so far has not concentrated on that aspect of the process. That has tended to be more ad hoc. And the idea of implementing a maturity model is to put a degree of formality on that as well. And Stephen is going to explain a little bit more behind that as well. So Stephen, if I can hand over to you now.
Yeah, thank you.
Click over to the next slide.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. Well, in developing a capability maturity model, our intention really is to focus on, well, how well have specific capabilities been implemented, and we've taken an approach here which is common across a number of tools. Can you hear me okay? I know there's a background noise, but is my voice coming through okay?
Yeah, no, it's fine. There is some background noise.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're sort of wanting to understand, well, how well has a specific element of specific capability been implemented, and this is a very common approach of a kind of hierarchy of starting with something that's been initially implemented and it gets improved and becomes repeatable. And at the level of being defined, I think we would say that would be something that would perhaps achieve compliance with OpenChain requirements. The managed level of maturity really reflects the idea that you're beginning to get intelligence out of the system. You're getting information back to saying, well, how well are we doing in particular areas or particular aspects? And then, of course, optimizing is where there's a degree of proven experience in place, where you know that you're actually acting on the intelligence that's coming out of your overall management systems in terms of being able to understand that maturity. Now, we know there are other kinds of maturity, and I'll come to that definitions. I'll come to that later on in the presentation. But because we really wanted to have this measure of how well things have been and are being implemented and whether there's opportunity to improve, that's why we chose this particular hierarchy of maturity standards. So, Andy, if you want to move to the next slide there. So this slide shows the sort of the principles of how we've implemented this model, which shows that the intention was to very much have something that was tunable to how well an organization is, to understanding how well an organization is adopting and implementing particular capabilities, and also something that could really respond to specific business challenges or priorities or risks, or indeed the overall complexity of an organization. And to do that, we felt that we really needed to be able to look at four main core components of capabilities. When people talk about capabilities, it actually can be broken down into those four different kind of capabilities of how well the organizational factors have been implemented, how well roles have been defined, how well communication and engagement is taking place, or even how well culturally the organization has changed towards the required ways of working. Process is fairly clear. How well a process has been defined. Information, how much information is being produced and how well is it managed, and what systems and tools have been implemented. And the benefit of having these four different categories is that these are very tangible things. So as a result of assessing, well, how well are we doing, it's also very easy then to drop out of that, well, an implementation plan for how we might want to improve where we sit. So the illustration there shows that you can give yourself effectively a score across those four different elements, and then depending on where you think you ought to be against those particular elements, you'll be able to see then a gap, which is a pretty clear way of saying, well, what's our implementation plan to improve where we're going. So if we move to the next slide, we of course are basing this model on the OpenChain standard. So the 5230 implementation that actually gives a very clear framework, and it defines a set of characteristics that are required to achieve OpenChain compliance. And what's been done is to take each of those requirements in the OpenChain specification and map those against a business function. And in that business function, you can then identify the maturity that's being achieved. So all of it aligns with the OpenChain specification. And what we discovered in doing this is that you can actually, there's a hierarchy, a way of doing this. You can take a quick, thin sort of look across the entire organization, or you can actually drill down into every single team and every single element of the organization and have a very rigorous assessment of maturity. And that's something that we think may be interesting for organizations to do depending on their needs at any point in time. So if we move on to the next slide, you'll see how we've done that. So this slide, if you're familiar with the ISO specification, you'll hopefully recognize those numbers in the dark green boxes. Those are actually the reference numbers in the ISO specification. And those are the sort of the 12 core main activities that are inside the ISO specification. And what then is shown inside the lighter green boxes are the processes that are required, the business activities that are required to implement and to meet the requirements of the specification. So you have effectively 12 main business activities here. And the the idea inside the model is that inside those 12 activities, you can give yourself a score out of 5 across the 4 lenses. So that's 12 times 48. So 48 areas of evaluation that can be done in assessing your maturity. And what we've done also in taking a look at the ISO requirements is also to separate out sort of 3 different layers of activity, which you can see there: governance, strategy, and oversight, enablement and performance management, and then the OpenChain actual activities, the technical delivery end of these. And we've done that because it's very clear that each of those 3 layers are interdependent. So, for example, you won't be able to put the mechanisms in place to deliver OpenChain requirements such as the production of SBOMs if you haven't got the right governance and strategy in place, and if you haven't got the right enablement and training and overall performance management in place, you won't be able to successfully implement the delivery activities. And again, it's sort of quite useful to be able to think about the way in which organizations have implemented compliance with OpenChain in those 3 different dimensions. And it's also quite a useful way of thinking about how you might want to respond to new topics as they arrive. For example, the adoption of AI models. It's very clear that in the work that's ongoing on now around the way in which the work needs to be done in dealing with open source requirements in the development and then deployment of AI models, there will be policy implications. Organizations will need to be clear about the way in which they want to source information to train models. There will be training, so that's the governance and strategy layer will have an impact. And then equally, then when it comes down to competence, there are implications for the ways in which people may want to be certified or proven to be competent in the development of AI models. And then, of course, there will be specific things that will need to be produced and done differently in the delivery layer of compliance artifacts, or in terms of reviewing license compliance in the feed in, and also in terms of what is then subsequently distributed out. So that's the way that the maturity model works, and we've sort of designed it that way deliberately to enable people to sort of handle key topics and issues as well as take a view across the wider organization. This then drills down into the next layer of detail down. So just taking one of those activity boxes, here's the set of questions which could evaluate the way in which people have implemented the bill of materials, which is obviously a very core element of achieving compliance. And the set of questions you can see there. I won't go through them in detail, but it explains the things that maybe need to be looked at from a people and organizational point of view, things that need to be looked at from a process point of view, what information is being produced, and what kind of systems and tools and methods are being used to support that kind of activity within the business. And then you can imagine you give yourself a score of 0 to 5 in each of those 5 areas, giving you 4 subscores for the activity of bill of materials. And so if you work your way through the entire model, you can end up then with something that looks like this, which is a dashboard of how you're performing against all 12 activities at the overall top level. And that gives you a score and a target, and it gives you some clarity of, well, how well are we doing? Where might our gaps be? And of course, you can then drill down into much greater detail. You can look at a range of your issues or topics or questions that you need to be exploring in each of the 4 different lenses. How are we doing culturally, or how are we doing from a process point of view? You could go that way, or you could also choose to produce a dashboard like this for each different team, business, or product area. And I think that's something that a lot of people are interested in being able to do, because there may have been a lot of acquisitions, or there may be new teams that have introduced, and so different teams will be developing capabilities at different rates and different speeds, and this kind of method allows you to have a consistent framework for showing to people, well, how are you doing, and where might you want to improve and develop and bring your capabilities forward. And that was very much the intention. And as I was sort of saying earlier on, it's also something you could perhaps even produce a perspective of how we're responding to particular topics or issues, such as the adoption and deployment of large-scale AI in our work. Andrew, you were going to talk about some of our case studies.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of case studies for you. The first one is a summary of the client that I mentioned earlier. So they're a very large organization operating worldwide, and they have multiple businesses and service offerings. And essentially, the logic behind following this maturity analysis is enable them to first of all, see what the position is across the entire organization and see what they have to do in order to implement this idea of continuous improvement as well. But it also provides an ability to compare different operating divisions. Like many large organizations, they have grown through a combination of acquisition, but also internal development as well. And implementation of the maturity model will provide a more structured way to be able to guide the development both of new organizations that have come within the umbrella of the parent, but also other internal teams that they have operating on various things as well. Another example that we're working on at the moment shows how the CMM, the first case study that I mentioned is really the classic use case for a capability maturity model. This shows how the CMM can be used for a slightly different purpose. And at the moment, we're investigating the use of the CMM in the context of risk management. So we're working with a global business-to-business insurance provider. And the products that they offer cover professional indemnity services to professional organizations throughout the world, but they also provide insurance products for use during M&A transactions, so transactional insurance covering warranties and indemnities in M&A transactions, for example. And one of the products that they're working on at the moment is an M&A focused insurance product, which specifically covers the risks which can come out of open source and the use of open source warranties. And historically, it's been difficult to find that sort of coverage in the past, partially because insurers tend not to understand this particular sector particularly well, but also because it's historically been fairly difficult to determine what the risk is. And obviously, if you can't determine what the risk is, you're going to find it difficult to find an underwriter that is prepared to write a policy, or at least a policy at any sort of reasonable cost. So we're working with them, first of all, to use ISO 5230-2020 as the framework to enable them to assess risk within an organization. And then that will obviously help their underwriters to determine what the risk is and write a policy accordingly. But going one stage further than that, in order to drill down and provide further information, we can then apply the principles of the CMM, because ultimately one of the rationales behind using a CMM is to reduce corporate systemic risk as well. So the flip side can be that your current state of maturity will give useful indication to underwriters as to what the current state of risk is, and that will help them to write a competitive policy for you. And the advantage of doing this is that application of the CMM by an organization, prior to it entering into some form of M&A transaction, is going to be beneficial to that organization in any event. As we know, implementation of OpenChain is beneficial because it assists with the procurement process and so on. It manages risk. So there's all of these collateral benefits, and obviously being an ISO, it's something that is easy to explain to third parties why you've done that. But as I say, going one stage further, if we want to drill down into this, the level of risk, then having the CMM provides more of a benchmark to enable organizations to do that. So we're having sort of very fruitful discussions in that area at the moment. And just to give you a little bit of background as to some of the other work that we're doing in this area. I mean, clearly for the maturity model and for OpenChain to be of use and to be adopted, in the context of M&A transactions, it's very helpful if there are precedent documents that acknowledge how the risk management and the warranties and indemnities are actually going to fit into the transaction. So if any of you have been involved in M&A transactions involving M&A insurance, you'll be aware that the insurer does take a fairly major role in terms of examining the warranties and indemnities that they are going to be insuring against, and they may insist on some modifications to those warranties and indemnities during the negotiation process. So part of this, we've decided to make public the set of warranties and indemnities that cover open source development risks. These are very much based on ISO 5230 2020, and we have been working with the Eclipse Foundation, who are also, as you may know, Eclipse Foundation are great supporters of OpenChain, and I think being one of the first foundations, even including the Linux Foundation, to have announced that all of their projects need to be ISO 5230 compliant. So this is sort of entirely aligned with the mission of the Eclipse Foundation, as well as the mission of the Linux Foundation as well. And so we've established an open source repository for legal precedents and templates, and we will be uploading this template set of due diligence materials, as well as reps and warranties, which can be used in M&A transactions. Just as a bit of background information, we've been talking to LexisNexis about that, so many of you as lawyers will be aware that they have a product which is aimed at lawyers to know-how product, provides an awful lot of precedence information, fact sheets, and so on. And we've been working with them on this. They've agreed in principle to be referred to this set of precedents. So the idea is really to bring the set of reps and warranties and the due diligence materials structured around OpenChain into the ecosystem of M&A transactions. We've received approval for the project. It's currently under provisioning status. We hope to launch it formally at FOSDEM. So if any of you are interested in getting involved, it's basically a pure open source project for establishing legal documentation, including due diligence materials, warranties and indemnities. But it has a broader focus than purely M&A, and there will be other documents that are completely unrelated to this topic that are going to be hosted there as well. So if any of you as lawyers are interested in this topic, there's a link there to the project page, but feel free to get in touch, and we can provide you with some more information about that. Stephen, do you want to give us a little bit of sort of info about the relationship with some of the other CMMs that are out there?
Thanks very much. And as Shane said at the beginning, there's lots of really good work in many places around maturity models and thinking. And we're actively connecting to and working with people who've been involved in that work, so that what we're doing is complementary and builds upon that. So we had some very good conversations with the team at Finos. They've had a strong focus recently on their open source readiness initiative, which really provides very useful common tools and policies to help sort of accelerate maturity. But the Jane Gavronski, excuse me, said that she's keen to refresh the work that they did on capability maturity models a while back. They're very much, of course, driven by the way in which open source compliance and management fits within a much broader and rigorous regulatory compliance framework that they have to deal with, which is why they've done a lot of prior work on the open source readiness piece. But they think time is good to look at sort of maturity models again. There is, of course, the to-do group work, which has been done and is published on maturity models, and that actually gives very good stages and descriptions at a macro level, if you like, of the evolution of the organization-wide, which talks about the way in which particular outcomes are achieved of going from initial adopter through to effectively becoming a leading contributor in the space. And there's some very useful case studies and tools. And our model is it complements that by allowing you to sort of drill down into specific competencies and risks that help you drive towards that overall wider level of achievement. And of course, our work and the recent experience in Tokyo shows there's a lot of interest in China and in Taiwan and Korea around OpenChain, and in particular, we've been exposed to and looking at the CAICT's approach of looking at maturity models, and they do drill into specific governance arrangement processes and link that to good practice. So there's some really interesting work that going on there that we're looking to bring together and inform and as we build the maturity model work here. The next slide. Where are we going next? So we do have a number of collaborators sort of lined up who are keen to take past expression interest and to sort of get involved in interviews to help shape the use case of the maturity model, and also to explore the ways in which key topics play out across that model in the way that we described. And of course, if you didn't make the OpenChain Summit, there was a fantastic opportunity to take a snapshot through many of the range of topics and issues that people are working with now. And we're keen to look at the way in which the maturity model can support these kind of questions about the development of AI, how to de-risk the supply chain, or how to embed capabilities well into the supply chain, looking at the impact of the legislation frameworks, DORA and CRA, and as Andrew's already talked about, the M&A and risk management side of things. And we're also keen to understand the way in which some inner source programs are also being deployed, and ways in which good practice. But really, we're interested in, of course, to hear today any other thoughts people have for key topics or issues, or ways in which they might want to help and collaborate in the ongoing work around maturity models with us.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thanks very much, Stephen. So yeah, I mean, this is stuff that we're going to be sharing. Just let me stop the screen share now. You know, a lot of the materials we want to make available to the world, you know, we're sort of happy for these to be adopted very broadly. As I say, we've already seen a number of opportunities to use them in fields that are sort of slightly maybe apart from the usual field in which you'd expect to be seeing a CMM. So thank you very much indeed for your attention. I mean, does anyone have any questions? Very happy to talk about this, discuss this, and very useful to have a sort of fantastic range of people on the call as well.
Yeah, well, I've got one straight away. So just this is pulling from your old slides, you know, the example assessments and the model material. You know, is there the opportunity for us to have some of this material go into the OpenChain reference material in the future? And, you know, how could we go about that? Because it looks like these assessment approaches, this concept could be very useful for a lot of people. Now, this isn't to say we want to wholesale take all of your material, but I'm just curious if that we could get some of this into the OpenChain reference library, because we basically have nothing to guide people on how to mature themselves throughout the different stages of dealing with something like ISO 5230.
That's very much the intention. We want to do that. So the only thing we want to be a little bit careful about is you know, clearly the rationale behind OpenChain, the OpenChain specification, is that it does not provide sort of too much detail in terms of the actual specific means of implementation. And so when it comes to looking at maturity in terms of client engagement, then, you know, the stage that we will get to is the next stage after this is you know, they'll say, okay, it's clear that we have an issue around sort of business activity, whatever it happens to be. And then we will work with them, for example, to implement tooling that solves that particular problem. Now, we see that as being outside the scope of OpenChain. That's really saying, you know, here is the here's the framework. There are any number of ways in which we can comply with that particular framework. And when we talk about specific client engagements, then that's the point at which we're going to get more specific in terms of, and it seems to us, knowing your organization, this is the best way to implement that. So that's the only caveat that I would give. We're very happy to share all of this information, but only at the level, and and what you can see in front of you now is an example of the sort of materials that we'll be happy to share. We won't be sort of diving into anything that says, oh, and by the way, the way to solve this is to buy product X, or implement SW360, or purchase Black Duck or whatever. That is going to be something that will have to be specific to the organization, the recommendations that we make.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, for OpenChain, our modeling ourselves, our mental modeling here has always been to keep things flexible, so no one mistakes our reference material as prescriptive. So,
Exactly.
looking at
Yes.
reference training slides, it's like, here's a general way you can train people. Off you go.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Precisely. But no, I mean, we would be very happy to see this become generally adopted by the community, and we will sort of do what's necessary, including making these materials available for that to happen.
That's great. Provisionally, perhaps we can target to have something in February, for example. Maybe we can start to noodle on something, share it around the legal group, and then share it to education as well. And the reason I said February was really just putting a pin in a random place, because I want to rejig our reference library again. And I was thinking of putting front and center, reference training, policy template, reference maturity models as well could be something that go front and center as a way to guide people who might be management in a good direction.
Yep, that makes
I'm
sense.
thinking out loud here as opposed to prescribing a course of action.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, probably from our perspective, a bit ambitious to ask for the questions at this particular level to be available at that stage. But certainly the overall framework, I think, should be something that we're able to share, at least on a sort of an alpha or beta version at that point.
For the sake of fun, then we're going to potentially have a Kaizen approach to the reference maturity modeling. We start bare bones and build out.
Yeah, Martin's asking why the legal work group. I mean, I think from our perspective, we have no a particular concern about where the home of this is. Any work group, including local country work groups that want to get involved in this, we'd be sort of very happy for them to get involved as well. So it obviously has, to the extent that it has an overlap with legal activities, and this is I sort of why we're here today, basically, because clearly it does in relation to, for example, the M&A due diligence work that we've been doing, and the Corinthian project. Generally speaking, it's obviously aspects of this will have a home in any of the other work groups. I can see there are overlaps there for sort of automotive, for example, as well as the country work groups.
Absolutely. And I suppose, if we proceed with a generic reference version, then the ultimate home for it is under education, our reference material central. But exactly as you said, things like legal work group and so on might decide to noodle on a part of this, and so on. And it's ultimately doesn't matter if work groups go off and do something on it, because if it's an open chain reference material, it'll just be going into GitHub in the end at the same resource with issues and so on. But legal seems like a great starting point where we're flagging to the people who might be dealing with risk management and maturity. Here's something people are thinking about. And then education for the actual execution of open chain reference material. Does anyone else have a question at this juncture? If not, I have one item, which would be just an expansion. I got an instant message just asking for more information about this item, which is hopefully showing correctly. The full profile assessment.
Yeah.
And the question I had from about the full profile assessment was just related to the scoring and the targets
Yeah.
and determining how is that scoring set? You know, the
Yeah.
0 to 5.
Yeah.
How do you judge the company on that scale?
Yeah. So the scoring is set in the way that I sort of probably cantered through in the model. So you have an overall scoring framework of 0 to 5, which was explained in the top slide, in terms of the different aspects of maturity, and then against each of the four lenses. So let's say for program scope, you would look at a score for the people and organizational factors. You look at a score for the processes that are implemented. You look at a score for the information that's there, and a score for the systems and tools that have been used to support that. And then you would compare that to a desired or intended score for that capability. And that intended score could be a combination of, well, where are we at as an organization and where would we actually want to be? Or it could be a hard line against, okay, where's our compliance target, which would be a score of 3 as a bare minimum. And that's the way in which this capability could be developed for a particular organization. I hope that is clearer.
Yes, indeed. I
Okay.
think that clarify that. And you know, a sideways question, Stephen, you've been involved in maturity modeling for many years, though I think a lot of our audience will be brand new to this. They're coming at this from the very beginning. Are there some resources you could recommend to help people anchor themselves in the philosophy of maturity modeling, to anchor themselves in the mental model that has been applied and will be applied by others in this domain?
Yes, I will do. I can dig out a sort of a selection of pieces. This approach is, I think, I think got colleagues from PwC. I mean, this kind of approach is very common in the management consulting space, and then also in terms of sort of particular industry focus groups in this way. So typically, once a standard has been established, you will quite often find a maturity capability model follows really quite quickly with this kind of metric in place. So there's a range of papers I could dig up as examples. There are, I think the thing we're really interested in to hear from people is sort of, you know, these things are only useful when they solve problems for people, and the you know, they're actually an interesting academic exercise, but that's really not the point here. And so, you know, in exchange for this kind of you know, dialogue that we're keen to have is to get thoughts back from people on, well, this might help us do this, or it might be great if we could solve something very different. So we'd be delighted to hear people's thoughts as to, or questions as to, how it might be used and or ways in which it might solve problems they think they're focusing on.
I think it would be fantastic if we could solicit that type of dialogue,
Yeah.
because I think, as I said, a lot of our community, they've never really dealt with this maturity modeling on their desk of open source. And yeah, if it would be possible to give a few prep links, I can include them in the published recording of this call. And our primary audience will be the people watching this recording. So we'll publish that. And I think if we could give people some introductory links, and if we could also make it very clear to them, for example, if they swing back into the legal work group, they can send an email and dig out here. But we're doing an on-ramp. And as part of that on-ramp, we can task people with questioning if they immediately see applicability to their company
Yeah. Yeah.
of the general concept and then of this specific approach. We'll pick up a form or something for feedback if you wish.
Yeah.
How about
Yeah, I think the important thing about this kind of tool is it's a really useful communication tool. It's really useful to sort of in all the complexity that goes with managing compliance and achieving and managing a wide range of difficult technical and management questions. Where should we focus? What are our priorities today? What are the things that we're really struggling with sort of right now, and what are the things we want to deal with in 6 to 12 months time? So I think, people are struggling to really see how the tool could really be applied as sort of a secondary question. Well, what is the top 3 challenges that are going on for you right now in terms of thinking about the way in which where you want to go next in implementing and improving your work with OpenChain, and that's the kind of dialogue I think that would be really fantastic, because that would turn the sort of quite a rigorous and academic tool, which is very useful, but it would also then be extremely helpful to focus it on particular things that people are challenged with today.
And for a sense of sort of fun,
Yeah.
This is a side note because we don't expect people to have issues because we've got all of these lovely tools and information coming to them. But just
Yeah.
out of a sense of fun, have you encountered situations where people blindly wander into trying to do maturity models and create chaos in their org? There must be awful ways to suddenly have your Dilbert
Yeah.
boss say, "Oh, we're going to improve our maturity. Let's
Yeah.
break everything."
Well, not number one, working with the boss and say we want to achieve compliance with a standard, or we want to achieve this level of maturity could be totally the wrong thing to say to to leadership, because the leadership may be focused on something which is a real business issue, and I think that's the thing we need to do to sort of turn the question on its head and say, well, what are the business priorities that are most prevalent right now, and what do we need to achieve? Is it a question of reputation? Is it a question of quality? Is it a question of risk management? Is it a question of customer delight? And that is sort of preoccupying the business leadership, and how can OpenChain compliance and maturity help us solve those challenges is the way to think about it. I've experienced many meetings where people have presented a 158 items of evaluations and scoring to leadership on a maturity model, which has just left everybody kind of like, well, we just don't know what we're being presented with here. So there's a real opportunity and a risk with this kind of tool, because the tool can be quite seductive and people can see that as the goal, but it's useful to bear in mind the aim as the business change or the business priority that comes with a tool like this.
That is fantastic. I noticed that Martin had a comment. Martin, would it be okay to unmute you and let you speak the comment, just so that we could potentially have you on the recording?
Yep, no problem. So I'm supportive of this approach. I mean, my question about the legal working group was just to make sure that people were clear as to why it might be starting off in here. So not an opinion as to where it should necessarily be. But yeah, I've used a similar kind of approach before when I joined my current company, in terms of like the whole IP management activities. So kind of had my own, if you like, set of capability levels in particular areas of IP. So it could be trademarks, for example. Currently, we're at level 0. We want to get to level 3. The top level is 5, but actually we don't have any business reason or justification to go to 5 at the moment. And at least that, if you're clear at what those levels are, what you're trying to achieve in what time frame, that helps the business to understand what steps you're taking and why. So I think it's exactly the same principle as we're talking about here, and I think it's fantastic. It's a good starting point to have the framework for people to be able to start using thinking, and then we should be looking to back that up with the education materials or whatever, or different examples which may take you from get you onto level 0, and then maybe take you from level 0 to level 1 in particular aspects. So yeah, I think it's a great activity.
Actually, Martin, that's really useful. Thank you. And you actually highlighted a really important point there, which is, by doing this, we're not creating anything new. We're not trying to sort of blaze a new trail or anything. What we're doing is very much supposed to be compatible with the way that businesses are already going to be understanding the maturity of various different business activities that they're undertaking. So, for people that are sort of versed in this particular area, none of this should come as a particular surprise to them. What we are bringing to the party is hopefully that we are just providing more specificity around this small business activity. It's extremely important to us because our lives are embedded in open source compliance. But we want to make sure that what we're doing is not in any way incompatible with what large organizations are being able to do anyway. And the other point, I think, which you made extremely well, is that even if you apply this at a relatively high level, I mean, presumably if you're sort of analyzing trademark capability, you're not necessarily going to be sort of spending weeks on setting up bunches of questions you're going to be asking everyone to find out and do this. I mean, that's something that you should for a relatively small organization that's got a portfolio of maybe 10 trademarks or something, that's a sort of something that you can do sort of relatively informally over a few sort of conversations. So it is very flexible. There is no need to delve right down in all those specific questions necessarily. You clearly obtain more information when you do that, but it may be that level degree of information is just not necessary for your particular organization. And it's and as I say, the reason that we're here in the legal work group, this isn't the first time that we've presented this to work groups. We've sort of presented this similar idea both to the board of the OpenChain project and also to the Open Compliance Summit in Japan as well. So there are aspects of it that are clearly applicable to the legal world. You say education is obviously sort of very important one as well. It's not as if there is a sort of home as such for this particular project at the moment. I think it's up to individual working groups to pick up the parts that they're interested in adopting, and we're obviously very helpful. So very, very, very happy to be as helpful as we can in that regard.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Now we're running a little bit towards the end of our time. So what I'd like to do is throw open the floor to the any other business segment. And I just had one which was related to the new Eclipse project. Andrew, that seems to be relatively closely aligned with some of the previous discussions the legal work group had about the type of reference provisions that could be useful for attorneys. Though the Eclipse project sounds like it's got quite a large scope, and naturally, as you said, we're big fans of the Eclipse project and what they've done with ISO 5230. So this does seem intriguing. Has it kicked off? You put up a link. I assume that's where people go to get involved.
Yes, there is stuff to see. So we're in the process of provisioning at the moment, which means that we've been through the Eclipse Foundation has got a sort of fairly prescribed procedure as to how you kick off a new project, and we're in the very last stage at the moment, and that's purely the provisioning stage. So we've signed our committer agreements, we've done all of that. At the moment, they're setting up a website for us. They're setting up a Git repo. And so on and so forth, and so hopefully we will be in a position to do a sort of formal launch at FOSDEM. But yeah, you're correct. Is that the scope of this project is somewhat broader than just purely looking at the DD and M&A documentation. There's also going to be a number of documents on there that we worked with the Interledger Foundation on a while back. And they are an internationalized set of documents for organizations that are, small businesses, individuals, even who want to provide services such as content streaming services, etc., such as sort of music, videos, whatever it happens to be, over their website. So we put quite a lot of work into developing a standard set of terms and conditions that people can adopt for that, and also associated privacy policies, etc. So that's the next thing that will come up. And then we also intend to place some code on there as well, and the code will be aimed. I mean, one of the things we want to do is obviously, Eclipse has the Eclipse IDE, integrated development environment, and it's great for writing code. But couldn't you use that as a drafting tool for legal documents like contracts as well? So that's one of the things we're looking at, is to provide a plugin for the Eclipse IDE that will make it an ideal environment to create legal documentation in. But if you want to find out, any more information, either ping me or follow the link. As I say, we're in a provisioning stage at the moment, so there's not a huge amount of information there currently, but that situation will hopefully change fairly rapidly, and we hope to launch formally in a few weeks at FOSDEM.
That is fantastic. Given that we had previous interest in parts of this domain, I'm sure there'll be continued interest from certain parties who've been part of it. So I look forward to learning more. And if you happen to see Mike at FOSDEM, please pass my greetings and tell him I hope to catch him at one of the conferences soon. Okay. Any other business? Oh, Yari just pointed out he missed the first half of the meeting. Yep, we're gonna have the recording up soon, and please do ask questions on the legal mailing list if they come up. We'll make sure that they get answered. Right. With 2 minutes to the hour, I just want to say thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much, Stephen. This maturity modeling discussion is important. The idea that we could have new reference material for OpenChain is excellent. I'd like to get cracking on that pretty soon, so I'll go and talk to you both individually, and let's see what we can get done in Q1. The ultimate home of the reference material will be the education work group, but we've kicked off here, and we've also had some briefing on other activities which are occurring that will be of interest. So, Andrew, please also come back to me with what you and Mike are up to at Eclipse, and we'll keep track of that. For the audience who came live, thank you. For those who are watching the recording, it's a pleasure to have you listen in. And if you are one of the people translating this video for our various work groups around the world, thank you for your hard work. Have a beautiful day, everyone, and I look forward to meeting you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.